There was one beautiful experience I had with my mother-in-law that I really can't forget for the rest of my life, because it was truly beautiful and touching, to the point that I had tears in my eyes at that time. At that time, my wife had an official trip out of town to do audit for 2 days. That means there is an opportunity for me and my mother-in-law for 2 days. This is the full story. A week later, after I was out of town, I came home. I really missed my son, and strangely enough, I also really missed my mother-in-law, who had been with me at home for quite a long time. Her name was Mrs. Jamila. Meanwhile, I didn't really miss my wife that much. I was excited. Maybe because while I was outside the city, my wife and I always made contact every day by telephone and sometimes by video call. So my longing had been relieved beforehand. After playing for a long time with my son and eating fried indomie made by my mother-in-law, I immediately went to my room and slept, because that day I was so tired. The next day, because I was still tired, I planned not to go to the office. That morning when I woke up, I saw that my wife is already dressed neatly. "Tilda, come on, Dad, wake up. You'll be late for the office." "You know, Tilda," said my wife. "Tilda, Ma, I don't think Papa is going to work today. He's still tired. Papa can just rest at home today, okay? In the afternoon, Papa will call the office and ask for permission to take a day off, Tilda," I said as an excuse. "Tilda, okay, then Mama can just go to the office alone. Papa, get enough rest first to be fresh," Tilda said, my wife understandingly. After my wife left, I went back to sleep. At exactly 12:3, I woke up. The sun was hot outside. I left the room because I wanted to look for my son. But what I found was Mrs. Jamila, my mother-in-law, who was washing dishes in the kitchen. "Tilda, ma'am, where's your little brother?" I asked. "Tilda, Ms. Imran is awake. Your little brother was brought by your wife. He said Ms. Imran was tired and needed to rest. So your wife was afraid that she would disturb Ms. Imran's sleep, so she brought him," Tilda said, my mother-in-law explaining. "It turns out my son was brought by my wife. Wow, so it's just me and my mother-in-law at home." Chihuye. Thinking about that, suddenly my heart started pounding, because my desire began to appear for my mother-in-law, who I had wanted for quite a long time. Moreover, during the 1 week I was on duty outside the city, I never did it. So that day, I had to be able to get love from my mother-in-law completely, both body and soul. I had to be able to do it. That's what I thought. I immediately went to shower. After showering, I went straight to the kitchen with only a handkerchief. I did that on purpose, of course, to make it easier and speed up the process that I was going to go through with my mother-in-law. It turned out that the food had been prepared by my mother-in-law. That day, my mother-in-law seemed to be cooking my favorite fried chicken. After eating, I immediately went to my mother-in-law's room, and it turned out she was watching television in her room. I just went in and sat next to her. My mother-in-law saw me coming. Even though he was originally lying down, he immediately tried to sit up. However, I immediately held him down so he didn't sit down and remain lying down. "Tilda, Mom, just lie down. Let's watch TV together, ma'am." This is because I admit that earlier, when I was going to his room. My loyal friend had actually started acting and wanted to find a nest. So after I was next to him, I wanted it even more. At that time, I had forgotten everything, starting from feeling embarrassed, and also my loyalty to my wife. At that time, all that was on my mind was how that day I could have new experiences with my mother-in-law while the house was quiet. At that time, I was no longer focused on TV program. Even though my eyes are focused on the TV program, my mind is not there. Every now and then, I try to gently guide my mother-in-law's hand, but my mother-in-law just stays silent. Even when I start trying to start it, she also just stays silent. This made me feel like I got the green light from her. So I went further in my efforts to create a romantic atmosphere with my mother-in-law. So it wasn't long before I heard a sweet voice coming out of my mother-in-law's mouth. After I was sure that my mother-in-law wouldn't stop me, I immediately tried to sit down, and I also gave her a coat so that my mother-in-law would also sit next to me. Without asking many more questions, after my mother-in-law followed the code I gave. For a moment, I looked at her beautiful face when she was in a half-desired state. I looked at her with a pounding heart. Now before my eyes, my mother-in-law has really, I will do what I want. I had time to think and really didn't believe it, because my mother-in-law was so obedient that day. Could it also be because she, who had lived without her husband for quite a long time, also started to feel how comfortable it was when she was with me at that time? I don't know, nor do I care about all that. What is certain is that I was very happy that day. I will not waste this opportunity. Without waiting long, I immediately gave him special attention. I saw my mother-in-law closing her eyes, as if he also wants to live it. After we both really had everything ready, without thinking any further, I immediately positioned it correctly and precisely. Then I moved it forward. For a moment, my mother-in-law looked shocked. "Tilda Maz, this is..." "Tilda," he said slowly. "Calm down, ma'am, Tilda." I tried to calm her down while continuing what had happened at that time. I also tried slowly and lovingly, and at that moment I knew that as long as there was no husband, my mother-in-law would definitely not. I've experienced it again. I can tell by the slight difficulties I experienced while doing it. "Tilda, Mom, I love you, Tilda," but my mother-in-law couldn't be heard responding. But she just kept trying to welcome everything I did with love and appreciation. That day, I was really happy. That day, that's what my mother-in-law and I kept repeating until we didn't realize it was already 16:30, which means my wife will be home soon. I quickly cleaned up again and came out of my mother-in-law's room. That day, I finally got to have my mother. My in-laws, in my heart, I promised not to waste it. So since the first incident that I had with my mother-in-law, I have become increasingly carried away, as has my mother-in-law. So I always try to get this opportunity with her, like that day. I deliberately forgot to bring files or office documents. So I had to go home to get the file when my wife was already at the office, and I used that opportunity to share it with my mother-in-law. Of course, beforehand I had called my mother-in-law to immediately put my son to sleep, so that when I arrived we could be more feel free to share. Oh yes. Fortunately, the first time I did it with my mother-in-law, nothing happened that I didn't want. To be honest, I was worried that if my mother-in-law had an accident, it would be a hassle and I wouldn't be able to. I kept repeating it. At that time, 2 days after I did this with my mother-in-law, I saw that she was not fit enough and fell ill. I was worried and thought something wrong, but fortunately, it turned out that after drinking my mother-in-law's medicine returned me to good health. So to avoid that one thing, I always use a safety guard when I'm with my mother-in-law. Usually, when I'm done with it, I immediately take it out far from the house and throw it in the bushes. There was one beautiful experience I had with my mother-in-law that I really can't forget for the rest of my life, because it was truly beautiful and touching to the point that I had tears in my eyes at that time. At that time, my wife had an assignment on a business trip out of town to do audit for 2 days. That means there is an opportunity for me and my mother-in-law for 2 days. That afternoon, I was so excited and wanted to go home as soon as possible. I don't know why I was so enthusiastic and happy that day. Maybe because my wife was out of town, so I could freely share love with my mother-in-law, imagining that, my heart more and more happy. I didn't forget to stop by the pharmacy to buy a pack of safety equipment. At exactly 18:02 I arrived home. My mother-in-law opened the gate with my son in her arms. My mother-in-law welcomed my arrival with a very sweet smile in my eyes, while my son laughed happily while pointing at myself. After parking the vehicle, I immediately took my son from his arms while saying, "Tilda, Mom, please prepare warm water. Today I really want to soak Tilda. Congratulations. Maz Imran, I want to soak it. He, Tilda said my mother-in-law, laughing as if she knew what was on my mind. Not long after that, my mother-in-law came into my room and took her turn looking after my son, while I went to the bathroom. In the bathroom, my mind started to wander. I imagined tonight about my beautiful event with my mother-in-law. The plan is that tonight, I will invite my mother-in-law to my room. At the time my son is fast asleep, I want my mother-in-law to be my overnight wife that night. I will treat her well and lovingly like my legal wife. That night, when the clock showed 21:03 and my son was asleep. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law had gone back to her room. I got up and went to the TV shelf and started looking for and rummaging through my film collection. Finally, after finding it, I started putting the film into the player. After that, I pressed the off button and I left the DVD in the player without turning it on. I also didn't forget to prepare some protective pieces that I bought at the pharmacy and put them behind the pillow so that I could easily reach them when I wanted to use them. I slowly left the room and headed to my mother-in-law's room. When I got to her room, I saw my mother-in-law watching a film on TV. I immediately sat on the edge. "Tilda, ma'am, tonight you'll just rest in my room, okay?" I said softly. My mother-in-law just nodded. I grabbed the remote control that was lying near her bed, then I turned off the TV. After that, I took my mother-in-law's hand out of my room and didn't forget to turn off the light in her room. We both walked slowly towards my room without saying a word. Only my hand and my mother-in-law's hand indicated the feeling of happiness that we both felt. I turned off the main light and turned on the 3-watt night light. The dimness in the room added to the romantic feel and made me even more happy. Maybe my mother-in-law also felt the same way. We, who were still standing together, immediately started with feeling we were both together that night. It was very relaxing because we were free for quite a long time that night. We poured out our feelings for each other on that romantic night. As time goes by, the seeds of love grow more and more in our hearts. Tilda, thank you, Mom. I promise I will continue to make you happy, Tilda, I whispered, as I led my mother-in-law to the place where I usually share with my wife. But tonight, I want my mother-in-law to also be my wife. Even though it's only a wife in my heart and soul, a secret wife in my heart. Even though I've often been like that with my mother-in-law, the atmosphere tonight is very different with the previous ones. Tonight, we were both much more able to appreciate it, and there was no need to rush. Not like usual, where we did it quickly and in a bit of a rush because we were afraid that at any moment my wife would come home from work. Tonight is my mother-in-law and I's night, and from tonight until tomorrow morning no one will disturb us. That night my mother-in-law really appreciated her, so we tried many procedures. Until after we got them several times, we both smiled happily and looked at each other. Until finally my mother-in-law and I fell asleep. But at exactly midnight, I woke up. I saw my mother-in-law, who was still sleeping soundly beside me. I immediately got up and went to the bathroom. After leaving the bathroom, I went back to the room. I saw my mother-in-laws are still sleeping beautifully. Suddenly, my desire came back when I saw my mother-in-law, who was so beautiful in her sleep. I then approached her. After I tried for a moment, my mother-in-law seemed to move and open her eyes. Tilda, Maz, why are you awake? What time is it? Tilda, almost 4 in the morning, ma'am. Tilda, I answered as I continued my efforts. Finally, my mother-in-law started to give her speech by continuing to stroke my hair. I understand. That means my mother-in-law has started to get carried away again. Immediately, I started to perfect it with her help. My mother-in-law's face was really beautiful in the evening before morning in my eyes. It's true what people say. If it's something we get with difficulty and stealth is more impressive. I promise in my heart, I will always love my mother-in-law and will not waste her forever. Remembering her kindness and sincerity towards me all this time. My mother-in-law is special. Besides her style, which is not too noisy, she is also full of understanding. I look at my mother-in-law's face. There is a feeling of love and peace in my heart when I look at his face. Tilda, mother, do you want to continue like this with me? Tilda, I whispered. My mother-in-law's gaze was looking up at the ceiling of the room. Tilda, I want to. Bro, but I also don't want to hurt your wife's heart, Maz. Tilda, the answer was quiet and almost inaudible. Tilda, honestly, ma'am, since I've been with you, my life has felt so beautiful. I'm more enthusiastic when I go to the office. I'm afraid of losing my mother. I'm afraid that at any time my mother will leave this family, especially leaving me, Tilda, I said sadly. Tilda, mother will always be here, Maz. Tilda, dear. It feels so cool to my body and soul hearing that. It didn't feel like it was already 05:35, but we both continued, and finally fell asleep again. Around 7:45 we both woke up when we heard my son crying. I hurriedly got ready to go to the office. That day I was late getting to the office. The secret relationship I had with my mother-in-law went smoothly. In front of my wife, there is no visible special relationship between me and my mother-in-law, because we always behave naturally like a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, so my wife never gets suspicious, let alone thinks anything wrong. This really relieved me, but a week after my wife returned from her out-of-town assignment, suddenly my mother-in-law asked for permission. She wanted to visit her daughter, who was in another city. I was shocked to hear this, but because my wife was there, I just keep quiet and let my wife do the talking. I'm afraid that it's just an excuse to leave me. It turned out not. My mother-in-law said that she only wanted to visit for a week, and after that she would return to our house. It really hurt my heart to hear this. But humans can only plan, because it turns out that the thing I was afraid of actually happened. My mother-in-law didn't come back anymore. My wife is quite confused, because my son often calls and asks, "Tilda, where is grandma?" Tilda, and the one who feels the loss the most is me. Since losing my mother-in-law, my life has become less enthusiastic. I get angry easily at the office. I really feel lost and feel empty in this life. I often daydream, but in front of my wife I always try to act as if nothing has changed in me. Usually when I get home from work I go straight home, but since my mother-in-law left, I really feel miserable. My situation like that lasted for almost a month, until I finally realized that my love story with my mother-in-law might have to end there. It's true what wise people say: the more you love someone, the more you have to let them go from your life. Hopefully my story can be a lesson for fellow readers, not to get involved in love like I experienced. That is all, and thank you.